Welcome back, Econ1001, Professor Joyce. This is chapter 11. And again, as usual, hopefully you've done your quiz, and now we're going to go over the answers. And it's a kind of nice chapter because we're really talking about one of the major themes here is this notion of public goods, which is not, like public education is not a public good, and this notion of the tragedy of the commons or common resources. And we can think of oceans as being resources in which everybody can consume, and yet it's rival in consumption, as we say, and no one has any incentive to under or protect that resource to kind of manage their consumption, because essentially everyone has access to the oceans. And this becomes a problem in a lot of different goods that we have out there, and the market cannot really manage this well unless we assign property rights, which way the bottom line is going to be. So it's a good chapter. These questions are going to kind of speak to those issues. So without any delay, let's get going. So your first one was the goods that are not excludable include. Now, excludable, what does that mean? Well, if it's not excludable, that means I can't prevent somebody from using it. So the example I just started off was with the ocean. In other words, I can't stop people from swimming in the ocean, fishing in the ocean often, boating in the ocean. It's just too big, too large an area to kind of manage or to restrict. So we could say the ocean or use of the ocean is not excludable in many ways. Another good that may not be excludable, the famous one, would be like police force, right? So if a town has a police force, basically everybody in the town is protected. And the reason we talk about this is because if on my block, we hired a private detective to police our block, and I hired the detective, and you didn't, you would get the services of that protection because that person going up and down the block would offer you protection from somebody, let's say a burglar or something, and at the same time you wouldn't be paying. So there are these goods in which I can't exclude somebody from consuming the product, in this case police force or safety and stuff like that. And if I can't force them or I can't exclude them, then they'll consume it without paying. And the market can't handle this. Firms don't want to sell a good in which they can't exclude buyers, people who don't pay, from using the good. So that's why we have this notion of excludable. And if you look at the answer is going to come out to be C. It's common resources and public goods. So again, common resources become things like the ocean. It could become things like public parks. And a public good is a good that is non-excludable and at the same time non-rival. And let me explain that. By rival, I mean that when I'm consuming it, you cannot. So a hamburger is clearly rival. If I'm eating the hamburger, you can't eat that hamburger. That's just not available to you, okay? However, what good is public good? Well, again, I take the example of the police force, right? I hire a detective, protects my house and the block. You live next door to me. You don't pay for that service. You get to consume that service. That becomes a good I can't exclude you from consuming, let's say. The other famous one is national defense. In other words, if the country were to invest or to say, look, we want people to volunteer to pay for national defense, who's going to pay for it? Everyone's going to wait for someone else to pay for it, okay? The reason being is because I can't exclude non-payers from experiencing this protection afforded to the country from having a strong army or defense, for example. The other classic example is a lighthouse. Lighthouse blows out a light, right? Shines a light out there. Any boat coming by is going to be made safer because of that lighthouse. And so boats that weren't willing to pay the shore company that put the light up there, they're going to get use of the light without paying for it. So no private company is going to want to build a lighthouse because they can't charge boats for using it. So these are goods that we consider non-rival in consumption and non-excludable. In other words, I can't keep people from consuming them. I'll give you one more example. A good that is non-rival, but which I can exclude people would be a website, right? In other words, I can exclude you from getting to the website, but you can consume that website at the same time that I'm consuming the website. We can both be accessing that video or that display in this website. So it's not rival. My consumption doesn't block out you from consuming it, but at the same time, it's excludable in the sense I could only make people who pay to have access to this particular website. So those are the kinds of goods we're talking about. Private goods, goods that are both excludable and rival. What they call club goods, goods that are not rival in consumption, but they are excludable, the website, things like that. And we have common resources, which would be, for example, A major concern is overfishing of lobsters in Maine, for example, up in New England. And what happens is each fisherman has an incentive to go out in the ocean and get as many lobsters as they can. Well, what happens then is that, in essence, if they're not excludable. Anyone with a boat and traps can go out there and do it, right? And by doing that, they overfish the waters. And because they overfish, the baby lobsters don't have a time to grow because they're being caught in these traps, and you'll destroy the lobster catch. So common resources require a very important management because they are not excludable, but they are rival in consumption. If I go and get those lobsters, you can't have those lobsters. I've caught them. So those become important kinds of goods. So the answer again is C, common resources and public goods, because they are not excludable. I can't exclude people from the ocean, which is a common resource. I can't exclude somebody from consuming that lighthouse, which is a public good. All right.